Okay, my friends, this is my fifth and what will hopefully be my last video for today. It is Tuesday, November 5th. It is election day in the United States. I had to cover a lot of things today, just trying to provide context, especially I'm cognizant that 2/3 of my audience are not Americans, and so they don't quite necessarily understand how our system works. I'm trying to provide context. Okay, this is a great comment. The election tomorrow kind of feels like you're supposed to get a whooping, but your parents may fall asleep and forget. Okay, so yeah, I'm supposed to get this spanking, but hopefully they'll forget about it and be on to other things tomorrow. Okay, so if you're not aware, there's a number of elections going on. We're talking about the president, but we also have to talk about the Senate and the House. Now, president right now, as I'm recording this, it's mid-afternoon. It'll be about 4:30 by the time this gets out Eastern Standard Time, and polls don't close until 7 p.m. at the earliest on the East Coast, so we won't have any results for a few hours. But Harris has 0 electoral votes. Trump has 0 electoral votes because nothing's come in yet. Okay, the Senate. The U.S. Senate rotates every 2 years. So a third of the House is up, and then a third of the House is up, and then a third of the House is up, and they rotate in that sequence. So the Democrats start off with a disadvantage just because of how many seats they have where, and the Republicans start off with a huge advantage. And so I'm pretty sure that the Senate has a very high likelihood of flipping to Republican. That's not necessarily bad if you care about Ukraine, because Senate Republicans tend to be more oriented toward pro-Ukraine, a Ronald Reagan kind of worldview and a foreign policy, and so that's not necessarily a bad thing. The House, every member of the House is up for election, so there's 0 here and 0 here. And so you want to be aware of that. Now, I'm going to come back to that story later on, but let's start with the first big story, which is North Korea. How I spend a quarter of my time talking about North Korea, I'm shocked. And Anton Gerashenko said the same kind of thing. North Korean soldiers are defending in the Kursk Oblast. Even a few months ago, I couldn't imagine having to write these words. And same thing with me. I feel the same exact way. Now, there's been some engagement between the North Koreans and Ukrainians, but we don't have the details. Meanwhile, North Korea has launched at least 7 ballistic missiles toward Japan this morning. Not trying to hit Japan, but just showing off that they have missiles and they can launch them and see how big and bad we are. This was reported by Japan's Ministry of Defense. Fortunately, there was no casualties, no damage, but they're kind of feeling big and tough and that they can go and do this kind of thing. The missiles had a flight range of up to 400 kilometers and fell into the Sea of Japan outside Japanese territorial waters. So, okay, and the more aggressive they become, the worse this is. Okay. Darth Putin, the parody site, said, how come none of my tankies are saying that Putin wants to drag North Korea into the war, especially when I have? That's a really good question. Okay, next big story. West is cutting off the branch that it's sitting on, says Lavrov. Well, Lavrov has warned us for a long time that there's going to be this de-dollarization, and he's giving this speech here talking about the dollar, for which decades has been advertised as common property of all mankind. So we use the dollar as kind of a common currency so that as rates fluctuate, we all know we have a neutral third party, kind of that's how we're trading. The dollar, as the world's reserve currency, has signed a verdict, he said, during a speech at Creating the Future Science Fiction Symposium, which is a proper event to discuss issues like this. According to Lavrov, the dollar's collapse will be brought about by the policy of sanctions that the West is applying, including against Russia. Quote, the dollar, for which decades is advertised to us explicitly as a common property of all mankind, has been turned into a weapon of suppression and punishment of geopolitical competitors and the simply disobedient. And the dollar was condemned as the world's reserve currency and the means of international settlement, said Lavrov. Now, last year, he predicted irreversible de-dollarization. The year before, he said the dollar was shrinking. And in 2019, he claimed that the U.S. would soon collapse because of its sanctions policy. Now, according to statistics from the SWIFT international payment system, the dollar's share of global trade in 2024 reached a 12-year high in August. 49.07% of all transactions took place in the dollar. So they're trying to find a way to replace the dollar, but they can't figure it out because they can't come up with a common BRICS currency. Nobody wants to trade in rubles. That's just not going to happen. So, okay, that's where they are at this time. Okay, meanwhile, Russia is suspected of plotting to send incendiary devices on U.S. bound planes. Now, this is according to the Wall Street Journal, and Anton Gerashenko talks about this. He summarized it for us. European security services say that Russia was behind a plot to send explosives on a U.S. bound plane or U.S. bound planes this summer. Russia is stepping up its sabotage campaign against Western countries, and another piece of evidence against them are the explosive devices that ignited in the DHL logistics hubs in the UK and Germany back in July. And what we know so far is that they're putting something in the electronics that will blow up at a certain point. So the Polish authorities have arrested 4 people, charging them with sabotage. There was a Lithuanian apprehension as well of a suspect. The packages ignited on the ground by a lucky coincidence. That's kind of frightening. According to the German internal security chief, Thomas Holdenwang, after conducting tests, German police concluded that once ignited, the devices would be very challenging to extinguish. So Russia keeps playing this game, and they're going to get worse and worse as time goes on. Of course, the Kremlin spokesman denied it. Dmitry Peskov brushed off the accusations, calling them, quote, traditional unsubstantiated insinuations from the media, unquote. Okay. St. Javelin had a great quote here. Russia is ISIS with better weapons. I mean, that's a pretty potent statement. Okay, next, let's talk about sanctions. The EU's Anti-Fraud Office, OLAF, has launched an investigation into a loophole that allows countries like Turkey to rebrand sanctioned Russian oil for export to the EU. And the scheme has reportedly helped Moscow earn up to 3 billion euros. But that's not the only place that this kind of thing's happening. A U.S. firm was accused of exporting technology to Russia. The American company Elaview International and its 2 executives are accused of illegally importing sanctioned goods worth millions of dollars to Russia. The 2 accused are 54 Oleg Nadian and 39-year-old Vitaly Borisenko, appeared in Eastern District of Virginia court, according to U.S. Department of Justice, and they face 20 years in prison for exporting 3.5 million. I mean, it's almost chump change considering that's 20 years of their life for what they've exported. But these loopholes have to close. Okay. 4th big story, Georgia's opposition has announced a fresh demonstration on November 5th to protest the results of October 26 parliamentary elections claimed by the Georgian ruling Dream Party amid accusations of widespread vote rigging. And the people were coming out in force. I mean, this is, yeah, they need to keep this up. This needs to be the Georgian Maidan equivalent, and they can keep the pressure. Russia's not going to be invading anytime soon. They have their hands tied up. Okay, last big story. This is the U.S. election. Who do you think is going to win? Anton Gerashenko put this out this morning, and Kamala Harris, 61 to 19%, Donald Trump. Okay, and some said, I don't know, or I don't care, or whatever. Noel reports had Kamala Harris at 76.6 to Donald Trump 23. I think Trump's going to do a lot better than something like that. And my own poll on my channel had Harris at 84% to Trump 16%. And again, remember, 2/3 of my audience are on the left side of the spectrum. So you'd expect it to be around that at least, but it's more than that. So, okay, but we have to take these polls with a grain of salt. We also have to be careful about what we see on social media. I'm an American woman, housewife in swing state. I vote for most excellent Donald Trump because he's for the womans. Okay, Igor, I know you're trying, but yeah, so be careful of what you see. U.S. intelligence agencies say that this video claiming voter fraud in Arizona was created by Russian influence actors. Now, this is the 3rd time that U.S. intel has refuted fake Russian videos after similar fraud clips about Georgia and Pennsylvania have shown up recently. So be careful what you see on social media and evaluate it carefully. I talked about this in this video about fakes and foreign influence operations that I just put out. It was like my last video before I did this. Now, I did another video as well explaining how Americans are going to be thinking about voting and like what the issues are and where foreign policy is in that process. And I talked about like fault lines. And one of the fault lines that I did mention was the male-female divide. There are probably some people that just won't vote for Harris because she's female, right? There's probably a small section of that. But there's also a huge gender divide. Women are dominantly voting for Harris. Maybe they're voting for Harris just because she's female. There is a clear divide, at least in early voting. Women are outpacing men 53 to 44%, and I think that gender divide may swing toward Harris. And I talked about those divides in this video here, where I was talking about like which issues are important. So please check that video out, How Americans Decide. This is a Reuters article. Don't be fooled by early U.S. vote counts. They might be misleading. It said this: in the 2020 election, some states showed a red mirage in which Trump was leading on election night before a blue shift saw Democrat Joe Biden overtake him as mail-in ballots favored by more Democratic voters were counted. Experts accurately predicted that it would happen, but Trump still used the shift to amplify his false claims that the election was stolen. The opposite, a blue mirage apparently showing strong result for Harris, only for a red shift to reverse the trend, could also happen this week, especially in North Carolina and Georgia. Now let's look at this. Pennsylvania. I think everything hinges on Pennsylvania. As Pennsylvania goes, so goes the country. Pennsylvania did not have a clear winner in 2020 for 4 days after Election Day, as officials sifted through huge backlogs of mail-in ballots. The state is among only a handful that do not permit election workers to process or tabulate mail ballots until 7 a.m. Eastern Time on Election Day, which means it will likely again take days before the outcome is known. Now, the good people of Pennsylvania should have been in the government, should have been thinking about this and, stocking up on employees that can sift through things, but it may take some time. And the good people at electoralvote.com predict Harris is the winner over Trump if Pennsylvania, which has 19 electoral college seats, goes to Harris. And the margin in Pennsylvania is 49 to 48. It's razor thin, but it won't necessarily look razor thin when you get to the electoral college count. That's just how the game is played. Anton Gerashenko was talking about how this is being played out in Russian TV, and he said, I think Russia actually does not have a preference for Harris or Trump. You may disagree, that's okay. What they want is the destabilization of the United States. Hear how they're gleefully talking about potential problems that could happen with the elections. Here, this is Russian news being broadcast. Meanwhile, Americans are boarding up windows and buying up guns. What are they preparing for? Our own U.S. correspondent, Georgie Olashavi, will tell you more about everything. Facades of the American Capitol are trying on a wooden tuxedo. Don't know what to expect from the elections? Board up the windows. Don't believe the polls. It's all about believing the results, or you'll run out of plywood. It's gotten more expensive in the U.S. since George Floyd. But no matter who wins, the U.S. is preparing for protest. Neither side it has been said, will accept defeat. Because of this, the National Guard has been put on alert. The White House and Harris residence have been fenced off in advance, and security has been increased. In polling places, concrete fencing was installed in some places. Some polling places have even installed bulletproof glass and panic buttons. A harbinger of possible upcoming riots is the record of the number of wealthy Americans who want to leave the country immediately after Election Day because they are afraid. Okay, this is all hyperbolic, overblown. This is what Russia wants to project about what America is. Now, when I was at my polling place, I was standing in between somebody who was voting for Trump and somebody who I'm pretty sure was voting for Harris, and I wasn't voting for either of them, and we all had a genial conversation, and we got along, and somebody dropped their keys, and another person pointed that out to him. The lady next to me, who had a service dog, the service dog thought that the guy in front of me might have been a tree, and I prevented him from having a very bad day. We all got along. That's the America that we live in. What they're ginning up here is this mirage of this America that just has to tear itself apart. It really doesn't. We can be civil to each other. Now, the upside of the election is that we have a choice and we don't know who's going to win. That's what a democracy looks like. Different candidate and different candidate and different and different and different. What an autocracy looks like is pretty much the same slate wherever you are. So that we don't know what's going to happen is not a bad sign, but a sign that this is an actual democracy. Okay, last little bit that I want to show you here. Soldiers returning after a tough combat mission, and Darth Putin's comments that 700,000 casualties was always part of the plan. Hey, one more thing before we're done. I plan to do a live stream tomorrow from 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we'll actually hopefully know what's happened, and we can kind of unpack like what happens if the Republicans have the House and the Democrats have the Senate, and what happens if Trump, what happens if Kamala, what all these kind of things we can talk about. I'll answer all the questions that I can. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.